And the second is the inputs, the sun and the rain, and the third is the distance, the human scale. There is hope. This is not just food plus apocalypse, believe it or not. If we took all the agricultural land essentially east of the Dakotas and we put that back into the prairie that it would like to be, the United States would immediately become a net carbon sink. I'm going to repeat that. All the agricultural land east of the Dakotas back into prairie, the United States would immediately become a net carbon sink. And that is with everybody still driving their SUVs from here to hell. You know, the concept actually isn't that hard. For 10,000 years, it's been destroy, 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 destroy. And what we have got to do now is repair, 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 repair. So on a personal level, yeah, we can make food choices that are really about repairing the world. But until we face these problems of resource depletion, overpopulation, the social forces behind those, it's just a personal lifestyle decision. It's not addressing the systems of power that are destroying the world. Now, each new level of technology that humans have achieved over the course of civilization has accelerated the problem, both by increasing our numbers, that temporary drawdown, and by increasing our consumption. The average American produces the same greenhouse gas emissions as 4.5 Mexicans, 18 Indians, 99 Bangladeshis. No rational person could honestly believe that our finite planet can provide for this way of life indefinitely. We've got to face that. So this is Richard Heinberg. This is a great quote. There is an essential lesson here. If we want peace, democracy, and human rights, we must work to create the ecological conditions essential for those things to exist, i.e., a stable human population at or less than the environment's long-term carrying capacity. The longer we wait, the fewer our options. Social liberals and progressives who fail to talk openly about population and resource issues and to propose workable solutions are merely helping to create their own worst nightmare. So to put this really bluntly, we need to end civilization, especially the industrial version. We need to reduce our population dramatically and quickly. We could do both of those things. If we could think this through as a species and make some rational decisions, we could do it in a way that respects human rights. I don't see much evidence that people are going to do anything that is reasonable or just. The very creation myth of Western society is what? Dominate, conquer, go forth, and multiply. No hunter-gatherer is told by her God to willfully overshoot her land base. And I got to say, no marginally rational person would listen to such a God. But that's the foundational myth of our culture, okay? So that's what we're up against. And this is the real Voldemort and Sons, right? You've got patriarchy, civilization, racism, militarism, capitalism thrown in for good measure. That's food plus the apocalypse. Now, faced with Voldemort, the environmental movement is only offering us personal consumer choices with some moral exhortations. That is not going to save this planet. To quote Andrea Dworkin, what we need is organized political resistance. The task of an activist is not to navigate around systems of oppression with as much personal integrity as possible. It's to bring down those systems. Personal consumer choices are not going to disrupt global arrangements of power, and that's the problem. So here's the facts as they stand. Our planet is dying. In fact, she's being drawn and quartered. We're on the verge of massive ecosystem collapse. 90% of the large fish in the oceans are gone. 98% of the old-growth forests are gone. 99% of the prairie is gone. We're out of soil, we're out of species, and we're out of time. We need to abandon the concept of lifestyle politics and start thinking like a serious resistance movement. This is a war. It may feel like daily life because it's been going on for 10,000 years, but it's a war. And I can pretty well guarantee that if we were polar bears or black terns, we would know it was a war. I also think that if, evil Nazis had taken over our country and they were destroying the rivers and the forests and the prairie and the matrix of life itself, we would know it was time to fight back. I don't understand why ExxonMobil and Cargill and Monsanto get a free pass. I do know that we need a movement that is smart and brave and militant and means it. We need warriors who will put themselves between what is left of our planet and fossil fuel. And if for any one of 1,000 legitimate reasons you can't be one of those warriors, that's okay. What you can do is be part of a culture of resistance. Because resistance movements always need two things. They need material support and they need loyalty. And any of us can do that. Because this is the last moment to fight back. If there's anybody left alive 100 years from now, they are going to wonder what the fuck was wrong with us that we didn't fight like hell when our planet was going down. Yes. You know, you love something or you wouldn't be here tonight. Whatever you love, it is under assault. Love is a verb. We have got to let that love call us to action. So thank you. The whole last third of my book is addressing nutritional issues. So this is something we could talk about for hours. I'll just throw a couple things out just for you to think about. Your heart is actually surrounded by a layer of saturated fat. It is the fuel that is preferred by both your nervous system and your heart. And your brain is also almost 80% fat as well, saturated fat. There are cultures on the planet that get 80% of their calories from saturated fat. They have no heart disease. The main reason this all got started was a man named Lierre Keith with his famous 7 countries study, which he tried to prove that the consumption of fat somehow increased heart disease. So he picked 7 countries that showed that correspondence. In fact, he had 22 other countries at his disposal. He didn't put them on the chart because they didn't prove that thesis. So Malcolm Kendricks, he's from Scotland and he's a cardiologist. He's done his own little, you can go to YouTube actually and just type in his name, but he's done his 14-country study. This is all based on data from the Monica study, which was the World Health Organization. This is the largest study of cardiovascular health ever done in the history of the planet. And so they have data from 22 different countries, and there is literally no correlation at all. I mean, you've got countries like, well, the Aboriginal Australians have the lowest rate of cholesterol of anyone, and they have the highest rate of heart disease. It's 20 times that of Great Britain and like 32 times that of France. So, hopefully we can begin to question the way that this has been presented to us for the last 25 or 30 years. There's a vast amount of money involved in all of this, of course. There's always money, follow the money. Lipitor is the #1 selling drug on the planet. It's worth billions of dollars, and that's who's behind a lot of the studies that try to prove this, because of course they want there to be a correspondence between saturated fat, dietary cholesterol, and heart disease, and that's called the lipid hypothesis. And there have been just as many people fighting this from the very beginning. I mean, when the McGovern Commission tried to make these new dietary recommendations for the American public, they had to have 3 different hearings afterwards because so many doctors came forward and said, you cannot do this to people. You're only going to increase heart disease. And in fact, that's happened in the United States. I mean, with the kind of high carb, low fat, I think diabetes has quadrupled in the same time period. So it's been pretty much a disaster for human health. Again, this is something we could talk about for hours. What I would say is there's tons of information out there, counter information, and it's really hard when you're trying to make decisions about your own health. So my best advice is, frankly, just to collect everything you can and know that there is an entirely different point of view about this out there, very different than what people have, what you've absorbed to date. But great websites about it. Weston Price Foundation is the one I recommend to start with. Permaculture, yeah. Those of you who don't know about permaculture, it's a great thing to just learn about, even if you don't want to get your hands dirty. But it's basically a way for humans to work with nature rather than against nature, to try to provide for human needs. And they have a wonderful set of basic principles, which is care for the earth, care for humans, care for society. So I think the ethical framework is certainly in place, but they understand that the basis of all of this is topsoil. And it's your main job as a permaculturalist is to build topsoil. So all the systems that they set up in terms of growing food all are based on a skeleton, a framework of perennial polycultures. So this is right in line. I feel like I learned everything I know from the permaculture people. It was hard moments for me because, when I first started to learn about all this, my impetus was I wanted to be as sustainable as I could on a personal level. So that's why I chose, veganism, and I thought I was doing the right thing. And then I started to garden and try to grow my own food. And number one, there was vast amounts of death involved. It was absolutely horrifying. And I had to understand what I was doing to the topsoil. So the permaculture people offered me some other ways to think about it. I was like, well, okay, I could grow food this way, and that involves these perennial polycultures. That's not the food I'm eating. And you have to integrate animals into this to make it sustainable. I don't want to do anything with the animals. So there were these I talk about this in the book. There's just these terrible moments where these two different, really these things I believed in so strongly just kept smashing against each other. I was like, oh my God, what is the truth? What is the universe that I live in? What sense am I going to make of any of this? So personally, they weren't necessarily fun moments, but permaculture is a wonderful thing to learn about, and it's just gotten bigger and bigger. I mean, there's so many different problems that they try to address, human habitation and water. But it's all about how you capture energy flows, because there's constantly energy flows everywhere. So how do you make it stay as long as you can and do what it can do for you and your system and make everything, more dense with life. So there's great books. I know there's tons of classes around here in permaculture, but I give the 5-star approval to any of the permacultural kind of efforts on a planetary scale. I think it's definitely, one of the only hopes we have. So.
But the system we're living in today, and I was sort of interested, you threw in capitalism as sort of, almost seemed like an afterthought. And to me, it sort of was in contradiction with the way you led off, is the idea of how we begin to shed the notion that the system we live in has some kind of permanence. I feel like we're living almost like in feudal times of the great chain of being that kept people in place during the feudal order. And so the reference to Exxon, Cargill, all this, as soon as food is commodified, as soon as the production of food, the sole goal of food is produced for profit,
it's
and
over.
we're in this web, I mean, we're not even thinking of what's happened to Iraq, the cradle of this agriculture that it was a huge problem. Diamond identified that, but we're locked in that. What do you, in all your ruminations and traveling, what do you see sort of as you start to see a point where people are really beginning to really question the nature of the system? Or do you think that if people start thinking about food, we're not just going to think about permaculture in our backyards in the Bay Area, but actually start to question, where'd the shovel come from? Where is all this? Where is the hose coming from that people are using? What are the houses, all that. And how can we begin to use the intelligence that obviously exists in the world to use it to exist, in a cooperative, to actually be part of the ecosystem again, rather than the dominant one. I know that's a million questions, and I can't go to San Francisco, so we a little about that.
Well, I would say we need two things especially. One is the resistance movement, and the other is the culture of resistance. And I think a lot of what you're getting at is the culture of resistance. That we need that critical framework that will identify, sort of from top to bottom, all the different, that whole web of oppression. Okay, so all the different hierarchies that are involved in this, capitalism, corporate capitalism especially, racism, militarism, patriarchy, all of it, all the ways that these all feed off each other. And then starting on the local level, what can we all do where we live? So how can we make direct democracy possible where you live? How can I grow the food that we're going to need where I live? And then all these questions about technology that nobody wants to ask. It's like these questions about how does technology change a society? How does it change our relationship to whatever it is we're doing, to the tasks that we think are necessary to support human life? How does it change all the social relationships in those hierarchies? And is the technology transparent? Could you make it? Could you and your neighbors make it? Well, me and my neighbors can't make a nuclear power plant. We can't make a solar panel. It's this huge industrial platform, which is going to collapse, So, I think these are really, these are the questions of the age. And we need to absolutely be gathering with like-minded others and at least asking the questions together and then try to figure out how we can shift institutional power in whatever way to make that happen. But, what I see happening is that a lot of the people who want to ask those questions have really divorced themselves from any concept of being politically viable, and I don't understand it, because we've got to have the political resistance part of it. It does not mean that everybody has to do that. Not everybody's cut out for it, for a million reasons. It's fine. But the other part of it we can all do, and that's to create alternative institutions that can take over as the system collapses, and to make those systems be about justice and sustainability. Those are the questions. Does it bring more justice? Is it more sustainable? And that's got to be the guiding principle for everything we do.